She was standing in front of the bathroom mirror, her hands gripping the cold marble sink so hard her knuckles turned white. Vivian Grace Holloway stared at her own reflection and barely recognized the woman looking back at her. When had the light in her eyes dimmed so much? When had those fine lines around her mouth become permanent marks of silent suffering? She was 39 years old, and somehow felt like she had lived twice that time in exhaustion and disappointment. The sound of Marcus's laughter drifted up from downstairs, mixing with the clinking of glasses and the buzz of conversation. He was hosting another one of his networking parties, another evening where she would be expected to smile, nod, and play the role of the perfect lawyer's wife, while he barely acknowledged her existence except to introduce her as an afterthought. Vivian closed her eyes and took a deep breath, trying to steady the trembling in her chest. 9 years. They had been married for 9 years, but it felt like she was married to a complete stranger now. The man downstairs, the successful attorney and partner at Whitmore and Associates, was not the same person she had fallen in love with a decade ago. That man had been ambitious, but humble, driven, but grateful, determined, but kind. The Marcus she had married would have never looked at her the way this version did, like she was something inconvenient he had to tolerate. Vivian opened her eyes again and forced herself to focus. She reached for her lipstick, a soft rose shade that Marcus once said made her look radiant. He had not complimented her in over 2 years. She applied it carefully, her hand steadier now, and smoothed down the front of her navy blue dress. It was elegant, but understated, exactly what was expected of her. She was always expected to fade into the background these days, to be decorative, but not distracting, present, but not prominent. As she walked down the hallway toward the stairs, memories flooded her mind unbidden. She remembered the tiny studio apartment they had shared when they first started dating. Marcus had been a law school intern then, working ridiculous hours for barely any pay, surviving on instant noodles and black coffee. Vivian had been a junior financial analyst at a mid-sized firm, making $42,000 a year. It was not much, but it was stable, and she had been proud of herself for building a career from nothing. Her parents had been factory workers who died in a car accident when she was 23, leaving her with a small inheritance of $120,000 and an ocean of grief. Marcus had been different back then. He would come home exhausted, his tie loosened and his shirt wrinkled, and collapse onto their second-hand couch with a grateful smile. She would heat up whatever simple meal she had prepared, and they would eat together while he told her about his day, about the cases he was observing, about his dreams of becoming a partner someday. He would look at her with such warmth, such appreciation, and say things like, "I don't know how I got so lucky to have you, Viv. You're my rock." She had believed him. God, how she had believed every word. When Marcus graduated from law school and landed his first associate position, the salary was still modest, $38,000 a year, barely enough to cover his student loan payments. Vivian had not hesitated. She sat him down one evening, took his hands in hers, and said, "I want you to focus on becoming the best lawyer you can be. Don't worry about money right now. I'll handle everything." And she had. For 3 years, she paid for everything: rent, groceries, utilities, his bar exam fees, his professional wardrobe. She even dipped into her inheritance to cover $45,000 in specialized certifications and courses he needed to advance his career. Marcus had been so grateful back then. He would kiss her forehead and whisper, "I'm going to make this up to you, Viv. I promise. One day, we're going to have everything." She had not wanted everything. She had just wanted him, wanted them, wanted the partnership they had built together to last. But then, everything changed. 5 years ago, Marcus made partner at Whitmore and Associates. His salary jumped to $215,000 a year. Suddenly, there were expensive dinners with clients, tailored suits from exclusive boutiques, a luxury car parked in their driveway. And suddenly, Vivian was no longer his rock. She was his burden. It started small. He would cancel their date nights at the last minute, saying he had an important client meeting. He would come home late, smelling of expensive perfume that was definitely not hers, and brush off her questions with irritation. He stopped asking about her day, stopped listening when she spoke, stopped seeing her as anything other than an accessory to his new life. Then came the comments, little jabs disguised as jokes. $52,000 a year? That's cute, Viv. I make that in a month now. Or, maybe you should think about finding a more impressive job. People ask me what my wife does, and I honestly don't know what to tell them. Each comment was a tiny cut, shallow enough not to bleed visibly, but deep enough to leave a scar. Vivian reached the top of the stairs and paused, her hand resting on the polished wooden banister. She could see the party below, the living room filled with Marcus's colleagues and their perfectly polished partners. Crystal glasses caught the light from the chandelier, the one Marcus had insisted on buying despite her protests that it was too expensive. Everything in this house was too expensive now, chosen by Marcus to impress people who did not care about them as human beings. She descended the stairs slowly, her heels clicking softly against the marble steps. Nobody looked up. Nobody noticed her arrival. She was invisible in her own home, a ghost haunting the edges of Marcus's carefully curated life. As she reached the bottom of the stairs, she heard Marcus's voice booming from the center of the living room. He was holding court, as usual, surrounded by a group of lawyers and their spouses. His face was flushed with wine and self-satisfaction, his expensive watch glinting as he gestured dramatically. "So I told the judge," Marcus was saying, his voice carrying across the room, "Your Honor, with all due respect, opposing counsel clearly hasn't done their homework. This motion is laughable." The group erupted in appreciative laughter, and Marcus soaked it in like sunshine. Vivian moved toward the kitchen, intending to check on the catering staff she had hired. At least she could be useful in some capacity. But as she passed the hallway leading to Marcus's home office, she noticed the door was slightly ajar. A sliver of light spilled out into the dimness. Strange. Marcus was always meticulous about locking that door during parties. Something made her stop. Some instinct, some tiny voice in the back of her mind that had been whispering warnings for months now. Vivian glanced back toward the living room. Marcus was still holding court, his back to her, completely absorbed in his own performance. The other guests were focused on him, as they always were. Nobody was watching her. She pushed the office door open a little wider and slipped inside, closing it quietly behind her. The room smelled of leather and Marcus's cologne, an expensive scent that probably cost more than her monthly grocery budget. His massive mahogany desk dominated the space, its surface meticulously organized. A laptop, a desk lamp, a pen holder, a framed photo of them from their wedding day. Vivian stared at that photo for a moment. They looked so young, so hopeful. Marcus's arm was around her waist, and they were both laughing at something the photographer had said. When had they stopped laughing together? She should leave. She should walk out of this office and return to the party and continue playing her role. But her feet would not move. Instead, her eyes drifted to the desk drawers. The top one was slightly open, as if someone had closed it in a hurry. Vivian's heart began to pound. She knew this was wrong. She knew she was crossing a line. But she also knew, with a certainty that made her stomach twist, that she needed to see what was in that drawer. Her hands moved before her mind could stop them, pulling the drawer open wider. Inside were the usual office supplies: staplers, paper clips, sticky notes. But there was also a folder, manila-colored and unmarked, tucked beneath a stack of legal pads. Vivian pulled it out, her hands trembling now, and opened it. Her breath caught in her throat. Inside were printed emails, dozens of them, all between Marcus and someone named Jennifer Cole. The messages were not business-related. They were intimate, flirtatious, explicit. Vivian's eyes scanned the words, and each sentence felt like a physical blow. Can't wait to see you tonight. That hotel room was perfect. She doesn't suspect anything. You make me feel alive in ways she never could." The folder slipped from Vivian's hands and fell to the floor, papers scattering across the expensive Persian rug. She stood frozen, her mind struggling to process what she had just discovered. Jennifer Cole. She knew that name. Jennifer was a junior associate at Marcus's firm. 28 years old, ambitious, beautiful in that polished corporate way. Marcus had mentioned her before, always casually, always in passing. Jennifer is handling the Morrison case. Jennifer will be at the meeting tomorrow. Never any indication that Jennifer was anything more than a colleague. How long had this been going on? Vivian knelt down and began gathering the papers with shaking hands, her eyes catching on dates and details. 6 months. At least 6 months of lies, of betrayal, of Marcus coming home and kissing her cheek like nothing was wrong while he carried on a whole separate life behind her back. She wanted to scream. She wanted to storm downstairs and throw these papers in his face in front of all his important colleagues and watch his carefully constructed image crumble. But something stopped her. Some deeper instinct that went beyond anger, beyond hurt, beyond the immediate desire for confrontation. Vivian carefully placed the papers back in the folder and returned it to the drawer, arranging everything exactly as she had found it. Then she stood up, smoothed down her dress, and walked to the door. Her reflection caught in the glass of a framed diploma on the wall. Her face was pale but composed, her eyes dry despite the storm raging inside her chest. She stepped back out into the hallway and closed the office door behind her, making sure it was positioned exactly as it had been before. Then she walked toward the kitchen, her steps measured and calm. Inside, her mind was racing, calculating, planning. She was a financial analyst. She knew how to assess situations, how to gather data, how to make strategic decisions. This was not over. Not by a long shot, but it would end on her terms, not his. In the kitchen, Vivian found her purse tucked on a chair where she had left it earlier. She pulled out her phone and, hands still trembling slightly, opened her contacts. She scrolled until she found the name she was looking for. Lorraine Pemberton. They had met at a professional women's networking event 2 years ago. Lorraine was a divorce attorney, sharp and relentless, with a reputation for getting her clients everything they deserved. They had exchanged cards and promised to stay in touch, though they had only met for coffee once since then. Vivian typed out a message, her thumbs moving quickly across the screen. "Lorraine, this is Vivian Holloway. I need to schedule a consultation as soon as possible. It's urgent. Please call me tomorrow morning." She hit send before she could second-guess herself. Then she tucked her phone back into her purse, poured herself a glass of water from the kitchen sink, and drank it slowly, letting the cool liquid calm her racing heart. When she walked back out into the living room, Marcus was in the middle of another story, his voice booming with confidence and self-importance. He did not even glance in her direction. Nobody did. Vivian positioned herself near the fireplace, a polite smile fixed on her face, and waited. The next morning arrived with pale sunlight filtering through the bedroom curtains. Vivian woke before Marcus, as she always did. He was still asleep beside her, his face relaxed in a way it never was when he was awake. For a brief moment, she almost felt sorry for him. Almost. Then she remembered the folder in his office, the emails, Jennifer Cole's name appearing over and over again like a recurring nightmare, and the sympathy evaporated. She slipped out of bed quietly and went through her morning routine on autopilot. Shower, coffee, toast she could barely taste. Marcus emerged an hour later, already dressed in one of his tailored suits, his hair perfectly styled. He grabbed his briefcase and a travel mug of coffee without saying a word to her. No good morning, no acknowledgement that she existed. He was halfway out the door when he turned back, almost as an afterthought. "I'll be home late tonight. Client dinner," he said flatly, not quite meeting her eyes. Vivian nodded, her expression neutral. "Of course. Have a good day." He left without responding, the door closing with a decisive click behind him. Vivian stood in the empty kitchen, listening to the sound of his car starting in the driveway, the engine fading as he drove away. Then she picked up her phone and checked her messages. Lorraine had responded at 7 in the morning. "Can you come to my office today at 2? I'll move things around. This sounds serious." Vivian typed back immediately, "I'll be there. Thank you." She arrived at Lorraine Pemberton's office building at 1:55 that afternoon. The law firm occupied the 10th floor of a sleek glass tower downtown, the kind of place that screamed competence and success. The receptionist, a young woman with a professional smile, directed her to a conference room where Lorraine was already waiting. Lorraine stood as Vivian entered. She was a striking woman in her mid-50s, with silver hair cut in a sharp bob and intelligent gray eyes that seemed to see everything. She wore a burgundy suit that was both elegant and authoritative, and when she shook Vivian's hand, her grip was firm and reassuring. "Vivian," Lorraine said warmly, "it's good to see you again, though I wish it were under better circumstances. Please, sit down." Vivian sat in one of the leather chairs and placed her purse on the table. Her hands were surprisingly steady now. She had spent the entire morning preparing for this moment, organizing her thoughts, gathering her courage. "Thank you for seeing me on such short notice," Vivian began. "I know you must be incredibly busy." Lorraine waved a hand dismissively. "Nonsense. Your message sounded urgent, and I always make time for women who need help." She leaned forward slightly, her expression serious but kind. "Now, tell me what's going on. Take your time. I'm listening." And Vivian told her everything. She started at the beginning, with meeting Marcus 10 years ago when he was just a struggling law intern with big dreams and no money. She described how she had supported him financially through his early career, paying for everything from rent to his bar exam fees to $45,000 in specialized certifications. She explained how she had used $120,000 from her inheritance as the down payment on their home, believing they were building a future together. Then she described how everything changed when Marcus made partner. The emotional distance, the cruel comments about her salary, the canceled plans, the way he treated her like an embarrassing accessory rather than his wife. Finally, she told Lorraine about discovering the emails between Marcus and Jennifer Cole, hidden in his office desk. Lorraine listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes on a yellow legal pad. When Vivian finished, there was a moment of silence. Then Lorraine set down her pen and looked at Vivian with an expression that was equal parts compassion and determination. "First of all," Lorraine said firmly, "I'm sorry you're going through this. What he's done is not just cruel, it's financially exploitative. You invested in his career, in your home, in your marriage, and he's repaid you with disrespect and infidelity." She paused, tapping her pen against the notepad. "But here's the good news. You have options. Very good options." Vivian felt something loosen in her chest, like a fist that had been clenched for months finally beginning to open. "What kind of options?" Lorraine smiled, and there was something almost predatory in it. "The kind that make sure you get everything you're entitled to. Let's start with the house. You said the down payment of $120,000 came from your personal inheritance, correct? Do you have documentation proving that?" "Yes," Vivian said. "I have the bank statements showing the inheritance deposit and the withdrawal for the down payment. I kept everything." "Excellent," Lorraine said, making another note. "That down payment is your separate property, not marital property. In a divorce, you're entitled to have that full amount returned to you before any remaining equity is divided. And given that your home has likely appreciated significantly over 9 years, we're talking about a substantial sum." Vivian's mind began calculating numbers automatically, a habit from her years as a financial analyst. If the house was now worth $450,000 and they still owed about $180,000 on the mortgage, that left $270,000 in equity. Her $120,000 would come off the top, leaving $150,000 to split. She would walk away with $195,000 from the house alone. Now, Lorraine continued, let's talk about his business. You mentioned he's a partner at Whitmore and Associates. Does he work from home at all? Yes, Vivian said. He has a home office where he meets clients sometimes, does paperwork, makes calls. He's worked from there at least 2 or 3 days a week for the past 4 years. Lorraine's smile widened. That's what I was hoping you'd say. If his partnership interest in the law firm was built or maintained using marital resources, including your home as his workspace, then that partnership interest is partially marital property. We can argue that you're entitled to a percentage of its value. Vivian's eyes widened. She had not even considered that possibility. How much of a percentage? That depends on several factors, Lorraine said. But based on what you've told me, I'd estimate we could argue for 25 to 35%. These partnerships are often worth quite a bit, especially at a firm like Whitmore. We'll need to get a forensic accountant involved to properly value it, but we're likely talking about another $100,000 or more in your favor. The numbers kept adding up in Vivian's head, and for the first time in months, she felt something other than despair. She felt hope. She felt power. There's also the matter of your financial contributions to his education and career, Lorraine said. You mentioned $45,000 in certifications and courses. Do you have records of those payments? Every single one. Vivian confirmed. I have credit card statements, receipts, bank transfers. I'm meticulous about record keeping. Of course you are, Lorraine said with approval. You're a financial analyst. That's going to serve you very well here. In many jurisdictions, when one spouse significantly contributes to the other's education or professional advancement, they're entitled to reimbursement, often with interest. We'll pursue that as well. They spent the next hour going over details, strategy, timelines. Lorraine explained that divorce proceedings could be swift or drawn out, depending on how cooperative Marcus chose to be. But she assured Vivian that they would be prepared for either scenario. She recommended moving quietly and carefully, gathering every piece of documentation they might need before filing anything. Don't confront him yet, Lorraine advised. Don't let him know you've discovered the affair or that you're considering divorce. We need time to build an airtight case. Can you do that? Can you continue living in that house, pretending everything is normal, while we prepare? Vivian thought about it. The idea of sharing a bed with Marcus, of sitting across from him at the dinner table, of maintaining the charade of their marriage while knowing what she knew, made her stomach turn. But she had spent years being underestimated, being dismissed, being treated as less than she was. She could handle a few more months of pretending if it meant securing her future. Yes, she said firmly. I can do that. Good, Lorraine said. I'm going to need you to gather some specific documents for me. Bank statements for the past 10 years, tax returns, mortgage documents, anything showing your financial contributions to the marriage. Also, if you can safely access more evidence of the affair without him knowing, that would strengthen our position. Infidelity doesn't always affect asset division, but it can influence things like spousal support and how sympathetic a judge might be to your claims. Vivian nodded, already mentally cataloging where all those documents were stored. Most were in a filing cabinet in the basement, organized by year. Marcus never looked at them. He had left all the household financial management to her, considering it beneath him now that he made so much money. As Vivian prepared to leave, Lorraine walked her to the door and placed a hand on her shoulder. I know this is overwhelming, she said gently, but I want you to know something. You're not a victim here. You're a woman who made an investment in her marriage and in her husband's future. Now that investment isn't paying the returns you were promised, and you have every right to recoup your losses and move on. Don't let anyone make you feel guilty about that. Oh, Vivian felt tears prick at her eyes for the first time since discovering the emails. Not tears of sadness, but tears of relief. Someone finally understood. Someone finally saw her not as the inconvenient wife of a successful lawyer, but as a person with value, with rights, with worth. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you for believing me." "I don't just believe you," Lorraine said. "I'm going to make sure everyone else does too." Over the next 3 months, Vivian became a woman on a mission. During the day, she went to work at her financial analyst job, performing her duties with the same quiet competence she always had. In the evenings, while Marcus was out at his supposed client dinners, she systematically gathered every document Lorraine had requested. She photographed pages, scanned receipts, organized files. She created a digital archive of their entire financial history, backed up in 3 separate locations. She also returned to Marcus's office several more times when he was out, always careful to leave everything exactly as she found it. She discovered more emails, more evidence of his affair with Jennifer Cole, hotel receipts hidden in his desk drawer, a burner phone tucked inside a briefcase pocket, text messages that made her face burn with humiliation and rage. But she documented everything, photographing each piece of evidence with steady hands. Marcus noticed nothing. He was too absorbed in his own life, his own success, his own affair. He came home late most nights, often smelling of perfume and wine. He barely spoke to her beyond the occasional logistical exchange. "I'll be traveling to Chicago next week. Did you pick up my dry cleaning? I need you to be available for a firm event on the 23rd. Always instructions, never conversations. Vivian played her part perfectly. She smiled when expected, stayed quiet when ignored, maintained the household with efficient invisibility. Inside, she was counting down the days until everything would change. It was during this time that Marcus announced he wanted to host another party. A big one. The firm was celebrating a major case victory, and as one of the partners, he wanted to show off. He told Vivian to hire caterers, buy new decorations, make sure everything was perfect. He wanted to impress his colleagues, his clients, the other partners. He wanted to prove he had arrived, that he was a success in every way. "Spare no expense," he said dismissively, barely looking up from his laptop. "This needs to be memorable." Oh, it would be memorable, Vivian thought, just not in the way he expected. She spent 2 weeks planning the party with meticulous care. She hired an excellent catering company, ordered beautiful floral arrangements, arranged for a bartender and servers. She sent out invitations, confirmed RSVPs, coordinated every detail. And in the middle of all that planning, she met with Lorraine one final time. "I've reviewed everything you've given me," Lorraine said, spreading documents across her conference table. "And I have to say, Vivian, you've done exceptional work. This is one of the most thoroughly documented cases I've ever seen. We have ironclad evidence of your financial contributions, proof of his infidelity, documentation of marital assets, everything we need." "So what happens next?" Vivian asked, her heart beginning to race. Lorraine pulled out a thick folder. "Next, we file. I've already prepared the divorce petition. It outlines everything: the return of your down payment, plus your share of the home equity, your portion of his partnership interest, reimbursement for his education expenses with interest and inflation adjustment, and given his infidelity and the disparity in your incomes, a strong case for spousal support." She slid the folder across the table to Vivian. "All I need is your signature and permission to proceed. Once you give me that, I'll file with the court. He'll be served with papers, probably within 3 to 5 days, depending on his schedule." Vivian stared at the folder. This was it, the point of no return. Once she signed these papers, once they were filed, her marriage would be officially over. 9 years, finished. The dream of what they could have been, dead. But that dream had been dead for a long time, hadn't it? It had died slowly, in 1,000 small cruelties, in 1,000 moments of disrespect, in 1,000 nights of sleeping next to someone who no longer saw her as a person worth loving. The affair with Jennifer Cole was just the final confirmation of what Vivian already knew. Marcus had stopped being her husband a long time ago. She picked up the pen Lorraine offered and signed her name at the bottom of the petition. Her signature was clear and confident, not a tremor in sight. "When should we plan for him to be served?" Lorraine asked. Vivian thought about the party Marcus had planned, the big celebration where he intended to show off for all his important friends. She thought about how he treated her in front of those people, how he dismissed her, how he made jokes at her expense while they all laughed along. "I have a better idea," Vivian said slowly. "Can you hold off on serving him officially for one more week?" Lorraine raised an eyebrow. "I can. But why?" Vivian smiled, and there was something fierce in it, something that had been building inside her for 3 long months. "Because I want to do this my way." The night of the party arrived on a Saturday in late September. The weather had turned crisp and cool, autumn settling in with golden leaves and clear skies. Marcus had been in an exceptionally good mood all week, practically bouncing around the house with self-satisfaction. The case the firm had won was apparently a very big deal, something that would cement his reputation and possibly lead to even more lucrative clients. He talked about it constantly, though never to Vivian directly. She simply overheard his phone conversations, his boasting to colleagues and friends about his brilliant legal strategy. Vivian spent the day of the party preparing everything with calm precision. The caterers arrived at 3 in the afternoon, setting up stations in the dining room and kitchen. The bartender came at 4, arranging bottles and glasses on the bar cart in the living room. The flower arrangements were delivered at 4:30, elegant white roses and deep purple orchids that Marcus had insisted on because they looked expensive. Everything was perfect, just as he had demanded. Vivian herself got ready with unusual care. She took a long shower, styled her dark hair in soft waves that framed her face, applied makeup more carefully than she had in months. She chose a dress she had bought years ago but rarely wore, a deep emerald green that brought out her eyes and fit her figure beautifully. When she looked at herself in the mirror, she saw something she had not seen in a long time, a woman who knew her worth. She also saw the folder sitting on her dresser, the one Lorraine had given her. Inside were copies of the divorce petition, all the financial documentation they had compiled, and a summary sheet outlining exactly what Vivian was entitled to. She had practiced what she would say, rehearsed it in her mind dozens of times over the past week. Tonight, in front of Marcus's colleagues and clients and friends, she would stop being invisible. Tonight, she would be seen. Marcus appeared in the bedroom doorway at 6:30, already dressed in an expensive charcoal suit with a burgundy tie. He glanced at her briefly, and for just a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, maybe, or recognition that she had put effort into her appearance. But then it was gone, replaced by his usual indifference. "Guests will start arriving in 30 minutes, he said curtly. "Make sure the caterers have everything under control, and try to be more social tonight. Last time you just stood in the corner like a piece of furniture?" Vivian smiled, a small, controlled smile that gave nothing away. "Of course, I'll do my best." He left without another word, heading downstairs to do a final check of everything. Vivian waited until she heard his footsteps fade, then picked up the folder from her dresser. She carried it downstairs carefully, casually, and tucked it behind a potted plant near the fireplace, where she could easily reach it when the time came. Then she joined Marcus in the kitchen, checking on the catering staff, making sure the hors d'oeuvres were arranged beautifully on silver trays. The guests began arriving at 7. First came Jordan and Patricia Westbrook, both lawyers at Marcus's firm. Then Daniel Morrison and his wife Anne. Then more and more people, a steady stream of expensive suits and designer dresses, people who worked in law and finance and real estate, people who measured success in dollar signs and job titles. Marcus greeted them all with booming enthusiasm, shaking hands and clapping shoulders. The perfect host. Vivian moved through the crowd quietly, offering drinks, making small talk when necessary, fading into the background as expected. She watched Marcus hold court in the center of the living room, surrounded by admirers who hung on his every word. She watched him laugh, watched him gesture dramatically as he recounted the details of the firm's big case victory, watched him soak up the attention and praise like it was oxygen. By 8 o'clock, the party was in full swing. About 30 people filled the house, their voices creating a buzzing hum of conversation and laughter. The bartender was busy mixing cocktails, the caterers circulated with trays of food, and Marcus was in his element, completely in control of the room. That was when Vivian saw her, Jennifer Cole. She arrived with another group of people from the firm, looking stunning in a black cocktail dress that probably cost more than Vivian's monthly salary. She was tall, blonde, polished in that effortlessly perfect way that came from money and privilege. And when she walked into the room, Marcus's entire face changed. Just for a second, just a flash. But Vivian saw it. The way his eyes lit up, the way his posture shifted, the way he smiled at Jennifer differently than he smiled at anyone else. Jennifer caught his eye and smiled back, a small, knowing smile that spoke of secrets and intimacy. Then she disappeared into the crowd, accepting a glass of wine from the bartender and joining a conversation with some other firm associates. But Vivian had seen enough. That look, that smile, confirmed everything she had discovered in those emails and text messages. This was not just an affair. This was something Marcus actually cared about, something he had invested real emotion in, while his wife had become nothing more than an inconvenience. The rage that swept through Vivian was cold and clarifying. She had spent 3 months preparing for this moment, 3 months gathering evidence and building her case and planning her exit. But seeing Jennifer Cole standing in her living room, drinking her wine, smiling at her husband with that intimate familiarity, made everything suddenly perfectly clear. This was not just about protecting herself financially. This was about reclaiming her dignity. Vivian walked calmly to the fireplace and retrieved the folder from behind the potted plant. She held it against her side, hidden by the drape of her dress, and moved through the crowd until she found a position near the center of the room. Then she waited. At 8:45, Marcus decided it was time for a toast. He raised his hand, calling for attention, and the room gradually quieted. Someone handed him a fresh glass of champagne, and he held it aloft with a broad, confident smile. "Everyone," Marcus called out, his voice carrying across the room, "I want to thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate this incredible victory for the firm. This case was a challenge, no doubt about it, but we pulled through with strategy, skill, and determination." He paused for applause, which came enthusiastically. "But you know, success in the courtroom doesn't happen in isolation. It requires sacrifice. It requires focus. It requires being willing to make tough choices about what really matters." Vivian's hands tightened on the folder. She knew where this was going. She could see it in the way Marcus was building to something, the way he glanced around the room to make sure he had everyone's attention. "And sometimes," Marcus continued, his tone shifting to something almost philosophical, "success requires acknowledging our mistakes and learning from them. We all make errors in judgment, right? We all have things we wish we could go back and change." He took a sip of his champagne, his eyes scanning the crowd. "So tonight, I want to make a toast to lessons learned, to growth, to becoming the person you're meant to be, by recognizing what was holding you back." The room was silent now, everyone watching him with varying degrees of interest and confusion. Vivian felt her heart begin to pound, adrenaline flooding her system. She knew exactly what he was about to say. Marcus raised his glass higher, and his smile took on a cruel edge. "So here's to my biggest mistake," he said clearly, his voice ringing with false joviality. "My wife." The words hung in the air for a stunned moment. Then someone laughed nervously, and that laughter spread through the room like wildfire. People chuckled, some uncomfortably, some with genuine amusement, assuming it was some kind of dark humor, some kind of self-deprecating joke that successful men made at fancy parties. Marcus grinned wider, clearly pleased with the reaction he had gotten, and took another sip of his champagne. Vivian felt the laughter wash over her like a wave of ice water. She felt 30 pairs of eyes glance in her direction, some with pity, some with second-hand embarrassment, some with cruel entertainment. She felt the weight of every humiliation she had endured over the past 5 years crystallize into this single moment. And she felt something else, too, a fierce, blazing clarity. She set down the empty wine glass she had been holding and picked up the folder with both hands. Then, in the silence that followed the laughter, she began walking toward Marcus. Her heels clicked against the hardwood floor with measured, deliberate steps. The room fell quiet again as people noticed her movement, their attention shifting from Marcus to her, and back again. Marcus saw her approaching, and his smile faltered slightly, confusion crossing his face. "Viv," he said uncertainly, still holding his champagne glass. "What are you doing?" Vivian stopped directly in front of him, close enough that he could see the expression on her face. It was not anger. It was not hurt. It was calm, cold determination. "You're right, Marcus," she said clearly, her voice steady and loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. "We do all make mistakes, and it's important to learn from them." She opened the folder and pulled out the divorce petition, holding it up so he could see the title page clearly. His face went pale. The champagne glass in his hand trembled slightly. "So let's settle this now," Vivian continued, her tone conversational but razor-sharp. "That way you won't have to worry about this anymore." She handed him the petition, and he took it automatically, his fingers fumbling with the pages. "You've been served, Marcus. Consider this your official notice." The room erupted in shocked whispers and gasps. Marcus stared down at the papers, his face cycling through expressions: confusion, disbelief, horror, anger. "What the hell is this?" he hissed, but his voice lacked its usual authority. He sounded shaken, off balance. "That's a petition for divorce," Vivian said calmly. "Filed 3 days ago. You'll notice it includes a complete accounting of all marital assets, including the $120,000 down payment on this house that came from my inheritance, not our joint income. It also includes documentation of the $45,000 I spent on your legal certifications and courses when you were starting your career. And it outlines my claim to a portion of your partnership interest at Whitmore and Associates, given that you've used our marital home as your office for years." Marcus's face had gone from pale to red, veins standing out on his forehead. "You can't do this," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "You can't just ambush me like this in front of everyone." "Can't I?" Vivian asked, tilting her head slightly. "You just toasted to me being your biggest mistake in front of 30 witnesses. I thought we were being honest tonight about learning from our errors." She pulled another sheet from the folder. "Oh, and this is a summary of financial projections prepared by my attorney. According to our calculations, I'm entitled to approximately $340,000 in the divorce settlement. That includes my down payment returned, my share of the home equity, 30% of your partnership value, and reimbursement for your education expenses with interest and inflation adjustment." The number hung in the air like a bomb. $340,000. Marcus stared at her, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. Around them, the party guests had gone completely silent, everyone frozen in place, drinks halfway to lips, conversations abandoned. "You're insane," Marcus finally managed to say. "That's not how this works. You can't just make up numbers and expect to get whatever you want." "I'm not making up anything," Vivian said. She turned slightly, addressing the room now rather than just Marcus. "For those of you who don't know, I supported my husband financially for the first 3 years of our marriage, while he built his career. I paid for everything: rent, food, his bar exam, his certifications. I used my inheritance to buy this house, and I did it all because I believed we were partners, building a future together. She looked back at Marcus, and her voice grew colder. But partnerships require mutual respect and fidelity. You've provided neither for a very long time. So yes, I'm taking what I'm legally entitled to. And if you want to negotiate, we can do that through our attorneys. Otherwise, I'll see you in court. Marcus's jaw clenched, his knuckles white where he gripped the divorce petition. We're not discussing this here, he growled. Everyone, I apologize for this disruption. My wife is clearly having some kind of breakdown. If you'll excuse us for a moment. I'm not having a breakdown, Vivian said, her voice cutting through his attempt to salvage the situation. I'm having a breakthrough. There's a difference. She pulled out one more document from the folder, this one with several printed emails stapled together. And since we're being honest tonight, I should probably mention that I know about Jennifer Cole. The name dropped into the silence like a stone into still water. Vivian watched as Marcus's face went ashen. She watched as several people in the crowd exchanged knowing glances, confirming what she had suspected. Some of them had known about the affair. They had known and said nothing, complicit in his betrayal through their silence. Vivian's eyes found Jennifer in the crowd. The younger woman had moved closer during the confrontation, drawn by the drama like everyone else. Now she stood frozen, her wine glass clutched in one hand, her face a mask of shock and dawning horror. Their eyes met, and Vivian saw guilt there, and fear, and the sudden realization that her secret affair was no longer secret. I found the emails, Vivian said quietly, still looking at Jennifer. The hotel receipts, the text messages, all of it. 6 months' worth of evidence that my husband has been having an affair with a colleague while I've been home managing our household and pretending everything was fine. She turned back to Marcus. Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Or did you just not care? Marcus's face was a study in fury and humiliation. His carefully constructed image, his reputation as the successful, respectable partner, was crumbling in real time in front of everyone who mattered to him professionally. "Get out," he said through gritted teeth. "Get out of this house right now." "Actually," Vivian said, "this is still legally my house too until the divorce is finalized. But don't worry, I'm leaving. I've already packed everything I need. It's in my car." She had done it that afternoon while Marcus was out playing golf, quietly loading boxes of her clothes, her personal items, her important documents into the trunk of her sedan. She closed the folder and tucked it under her arm, then looked around the room one last time. These people, Marcus's colleagues and clients and friends, were staring at her with a mixture of shock, pity, and something else. Respect, maybe. Or at least recognition that she was not the meek, invisible wife they had all assumed her to be. "Enjoy the rest of your party," Vivian said. Then she turned and walked toward the front door, her head held high, her steps steady and sure. Behind her, the room remained frozen in stunned silence. Nobody tried to stop her. Nobody said a word. She paused at the door and looked back one final time. Marcus was still standing in the center of the living room, the divorce petition crumpled in his fist. His face a mask of rage and disbelief. Jennifer Cole had disappeared, probably slipping out through the kitchen in a desperate attempt to avoid further embarrassment, and the other guests were beginning to whisper among themselves, the gossip already starting to spread. Vivian allowed herself one small, satisfied smile. Then she opened the door and walked out into the cool September night, leaving her old life behind. Vivian drove through the darkened streets with her hands steady on the wheel, her mind strangely calm despite the enormity of what had just happened. She had rented a furnished apartment 2 weeks ago, a small one-bedroom place across town that was clean, quiet, and entirely hers. It was nothing like the spacious house she had just left, but when she pulled into the parking lot and looked up at the modest building, she felt something she had not felt in years. Peace. She carried the first box up the stairs to the second floor, unlocked the door, and stepped inside. The apartment smelled faintly of fresh paint and cleaning products. The furniture was simple but comfortable. A beige couch, a small dining table with 2 chairs, a bed with plain white linens. There were no expensive chandeliers, no Persian rugs, no marble countertops, just a space that was functional and clean and hers. Vivian set the box down and walked to the window. From here, she could see the parking lot below, a street light casting orange light across the pavement. And beyond that, the quiet neighborhood with its modest houses and old trees. It was ordinary, it was unremarkable, and it was exactly what she needed. She made 3 more trips to her car, bringing up the rest of her belongings: clothes, books, her laptop, a few framed photos from before her marriage fell apart. She had left behind all the expensive things Marcus had bought over the years, the designer dresses he insisted she wear to his events, the jewelry he gave her on birthdays and anniversaries that felt more like props than gifts. She did not want any of it. Those things belonged to the version of herself she was leaving behind. By 10:30 that night, Vivian was sitting on her new couch with a cup of tea, her phone in her hand. She had 17 missed calls from Marcus and 12 text messages, each one more furious than the last. She read through them with detached curiosity, noting how his tone evolved from demanding to threatening to almost pleading, and back to angry again. "You made a fool of me in front of everyone. This is unforgivable. Call me back right now. We need to discuss this like adults. You'll regret this, Vivian. I promise you that. My attorney says your claims are ridiculous. You won't see a dime of what you're asking for. Fine, don't respond. But you'll be hearing from my lawyer first thing Monday morning." Vivian deleted all the messages without responding. She had nothing to say to Marcus anymore. Everything that needed to be said would be said through their attorneys. That was the whole point of hiring Lorraine. She did, however, send a text message to Lorraine. "It's done. I confronted him at the party tonight. He's furious, but he has the petition. Expect his attorney to contact you soon." Lorraine responded within minutes. "I'm proud of you. That took incredible courage. Get some rest. The real work begins Monday." Vivian smiled at her phone, set it aside, and finished her tea. Then she went to bed in her new apartment, in her new bed, and slept more soundly than she had in months. Monday morning arrived with rain tapping against the windows. Vivian woke early, showered, dressed in one of her professional work outfits, a navy blazer and gray slacks, and headed to her job at the financial analysis firm where she had worked for 12 years. Her colleagues greeted her with their usual friendly nods and morning pleasantries, completely unaware that her entire life had just been turned upside down. That was fine. She preferred it that way. Work was her sanctuary, the one place where she was valued for her skills and competence rather than judged for her relationship status. She spent the morning reviewing quarterly reports and preparing financial projections for a client meeting. The familiar work was soothing, the numbers and spreadsheets providing a sense of order and control. At 11:30, her phone buzzed with a call from Lorraine. "Marcus's attorney called me an hour ago," Lorraine said without preamble. "His name is Richard Brennan. He's with Caldwell and Associates, a decent firm, but nothing spectacular. He was, shall we say, very agitated." "I can imagine," Vivian said, closing her office door for privacy. "What did he say?" "He accused you of ambushing his client, of making fraudulent financial claims, and of attempting to extort money through public humiliation," Lorraine said, and Vivian could hear the amusement in her voice. "I informed him that his client was served legally, that all our financial claims are thoroughly documented, and that what happened at the party was simply your choice of venue for serving the papers, which is entirely your right." He did not like that answer. "What happens now?" "Now we negotiate," Lorraine said. "Brennan wants to meet to discuss settlement terms. He's proposing we all sit down together. You, Marcus, me, and him, to hash out an agreement without going to court. I told him we'd consider it, but only if Marcus is prepared to negotiate in good faith. Vivian thought about that. The idea of sitting in a room with Marcus, of looking at him across a conference table while they divided up the pieces of their failed marriage, made her stomach clench. But she also knew that going to court would be expensive and time-consuming, and there was no guarantee a judge would award her everything she was asking for. "What do you recommend?" Vivian asked. "I recommend we meet," Lorraine said. "But I want you to understand something first. They're going to try to intimidate you. Marcus is going to be angry, probably hostile. His attorney is going to question every number we've presented and try to make you feel like you're being unreasonable or greedy. You need to be prepared for that." "I'm prepared," Vivian said quietly. "I've been preparing for 3 months." "Good," Lorraine said with satisfaction. "Then let's schedule this meeting for Wednesday afternoon. That gives us 2 days to review everything one more time and make sure we're ready for whatever they throw at us." The meeting took place on Wednesday at 2 in the afternoon in a conference room at Lorraine's firm. Vivian arrived 15 minutes early, dressed in a charcoal gray suit that made her look professional and serious. Lorraine met her in the lobby and walked her upstairs, briefing her quietly on what to expect. "Remember," Lorraine said as they approached the conference room, "you don't have to respond to anything Marcus says directly. That's what I'm here for. If things get heated, let me handle it. Your job is to stay calm and let the facts speak for themselves." Vivian nodded, her mouth dry but her resolve firm. They entered the conference room together. Marcus was already there, sitting on the opposite side of the large table with his attorney, Richard Brennan. Brennan was a man in his early 50s, with thinning brown hair and wire-rimmed glasses, dressed in an expensive but slightly rumpled suit. He stood when they entered, offering a professional handshake and a tight smile. Marcus did not stand. He sat with his arms crossed, his jaw clenched, his eyes fixed on Vivian with undisguised hostility. Vivian met his gaze for a brief moment, then looked away. He did not deserve her attention anymore. They all took their seats, Lorraine and Vivian on one side of the table, Marcus and Brennan on the other. Brennan opened a briefcase and pulled out a thick folder of documents, spreading them across the table with methodical precision. "Thank you both for agreeing to this meeting," Brennan began, his tone formal and carefully neutral. "My client is willing to discuss a fair and reasonable settlement that takes into account the realities of this marriage and its dissolution. However, I must say up front that some of the claims in your petition are, in our view, excessive and not supported by law." "Which claims specifically?" Lorraine asked, her pen poised over a notepad. "The claim regarding the house, for one," Brennan said. "While we acknowledge that your client contributed to the down payment, the mortgage has been paid primarily by my client's income for the past 9 years. We believe a 50-50 split of the current equity is more than fair." Lorraine shook her head. "The down payment of $120,000 came from Mrs. Holloway's personal inheritance, which is her separate property. That amount must be returned to her in full before any remaining equity is divided. That's standard practice in marital property division." Brennan frowned. "That may be standard, but it's also been 9 years. My client has paid approximately $4,000 per month in mortgage payments during that time, totaling well over $400,000. Surely that investment entitles him to more than 50% of the remaining equity after her down payment is returned." "Your math is misleading," Lorraine countered. "The mortgage payments were made with marital income, yes, but Mrs. Holloway's salary contributed to the household expenses that freed up your client's income to make those payments. She paid for groceries, utilities, household maintenance, and many other costs that allowed him to focus his income on the mortgage. This was a partnership, not a solo investment." The argument went back and forth for another 20 minutes, both attorneys citing case law and precedent, neither willing to concede ground. Vivian listened quietly, watching Marcus out of the corner of her eye. He was staring at her, his expression a mixture of anger and something else. Hurt, maybe, or betrayal, as if he had any right to feel betrayed after everything he had done. Finally, Brennan moved on to the next point. Regarding the claim to a portion of my client's partnership interest, we find that particularly problematic. Mrs. Holloway had no involvement in building or maintaining that partnership. The fact that my client occasionally worked from home does not entitle her to 30% of his business interest. That's absurd. Is it? Lorraine asked coolly. Let's talk about how that partnership was built. When Mr. Holloway was studying for the bar exam, who paid the rent? When he needed expensive certifications to advance his career, who covered those costs? When he was working late nights as a junior associate, barely making enough to cover his student loans, who made sure there was food on the table and a stable home for him to return to? She paused. Mrs. Holloway invested $45,000 in his education and career development. She supported him financially and emotionally during the most critical years of his professional growth. Without that support, it's highly unlikely he would have achieved partner status when he did, if at all. Marcus spoke for the first time, his voice tight with anger. I worked for that partnership. I earned it through my own skill and effort. She didn't do anything except pay some bills, which is what spouses do. Lorraine turned her cool gaze on him. Mr. Holloway, with all due respect, paying bills is not nothing. Your wife subsidized your entire early career, allowing you to focus on work without the burden of financial stress. She made an investment in your future, and she's entitled to a return on that investment. She's entitled to nothing. Marcus snapped. She's being vindictive because she found out about Jennifer. This whole thing is revenge, not justice. The room went silent. Brennan closed his eyes briefly, clearly frustrated that Marcus had just admitted to the affair on record. Lorraine's eyebrows rose slightly, and she made a quick note on her pad. Thank you for that confirmation, Lorraine said smoothly. So we're all in agreement that there was, in fact, an extramarital affair. That certainly strengthens our position regarding spousal support and may influence how a judge views the asset division. Brennan held up a hand. Let's not get sidetracked. Yes, my client had a relationship with a colleague. That's unfortunate, but it doesn't change the fundamentals of what's fair in this divorce. Actually, it does, Lorraine said. Infidelity demonstrates a fundamental breach of the marital contract. It shows that Mr. Holloway abandoned his commitment to this marriage while his wife continued to fulfill her obligations. That context matters. They argued for another hour, going through each line item of Vivian's claims. The education reimbursement, which Brennan tried to reduce by arguing that Marcus would have gotten those certifications eventually anyway. The spousal support request, which Brennan called unnecessary, given that Vivian had her own income. The division of household items, retirement accounts, and other assets accumulated during the marriage. Through it all, Vivian sat quietly, letting Lorraine do the talking. She watched Marcus grow increasingly frustrated, his face reddening, his hands clenching and unclenching on the table. At one point, he turned to her directly. "Why are you doing this, Viv?" he asked, and for the first time, his voice held something other than anger. It held genuine confusion. "We could have worked this out privately. You didn't have to humiliate me in front of everyone I work with." Vivian looked at him, really looked at him, for the first time since entering the room. She saw the man she had loved, the man she had sacrificed for, the man she had believed in, and she also saw the man who had toasted to her being his biggest mistake, who had dismissed her worth, who had betrayed her trust for 6 months without remorse. "You humiliated me for years," she said quietly. "Every time you canceled our plans for a client dinner, every time you made a joke about my salary, every time you treated me like I was invisible or stupid or worthless, you humiliated me in small ways, over and over, until I barely recognized myself anymore." She paused. "What I did at the party was just one moment, one public moment, where I refused to be invisible anymore. If you felt humiliated, then good. Maybe now you understand how I've felt for the last 5 years." Marcus stared at her, his mouth slightly open, as if he was seeing her clearly for the first time in a very long time. Brennan cleared his throat uncomfortably, shuffling his papers. "Perhaps we should take a break," Brennan suggested. "Let everyone cool down and reconvene in 30 minutes. They did take a break. Vivian and Lorraine left the conference room and went to Lorraine's private office down the hall. Lorraine closed the door and turned to Vivian with an approving smile. "That was perfect," she said. "You were calm, clear, and you made your point without getting emotional. That's exactly what we needed." Vivian sank into a chair, suddenly exhausted. The adrenaline that had been carrying her through the meeting was starting to fade, leaving behind a bone-deep tiredness. "Do you think they'll settle?" she asked. "I think they'll try to lowball us first," Lorraine said. "Brennan is going to come back with an offer that's less than what we're asking, but more than what they initially wanted to pay. It's standard negotiation strategy. The question is whether we accept it or push for more." "What would you do?" Vivian asked. Lorraine considered for a moment. "Honestly, I think we have a strong case, and if we went to court, there's a good chance we'd get most of what we're asking for. But court is expensive, time-consuming, and emotionally draining. If they come back with an offer that's close to what we want, something in the range of $275,000 to $300,000, I'd recommend taking it. You'd get the majority of what you're entitled to, you'd avoid months of litigation, and you'd be free to move on with your life." Vivian nodded slowly. Moving on with her life. That sounded good. That sounded like exactly what she needed. When they returned to the conference room after the break, Brennan was indeed ready with a settlement offer. He slid a document across the table, and Lorraine reviewed it carefully while Vivian waited. "They're offering $220,000, Lorraine said after a moment. "That includes the return of your down payment and a portion of the home equity, plus $50,000 for the education reimbursement. But they're refusing to pay anything for the partnership interest or spousal support." It was less than Vivian had hoped for, but it was still a substantial amount. Life-changing money, enough to secure her future, buy her own place, and start over without financial fear. She looked at Marcus across the table. He was watching her, his expression unreadable now. "I need to discuss this with my client," Lorraine said. "Can you give us another few minutes?" Brennan nodded, and once again Vivian and Lorraine stepped out of the room. In the hallway, Lorraine turned to her with a serious expression. "This is your decision," she said. "We can counteroffer, push for more, or even reject this entirely and go to court. But I want you to think carefully about what you really want. Is it the maximum possible financial outcome, or is it closure and the ability to move forward?" Vivian thought about it. She thought about the house she had left behind, the marriage that had died slowly over 5 years, the woman she had been, and the woman she wanted to become. And she realized that what she wanted most was not revenge or even justice. What she wanted was freedom. "Counter at $285,000, Vivian said. "If they agree to that, I'll sign today." Lorraine went back into the conference room with Vivian's counteroffer. $285,000. Final offer. Take it, or see them in court. Vivian waited in the hallway, her back against the cool wall, her heart beating steadily in her chest. She felt strangely calm, as if she had already made peace with whatever outcome lay ahead. 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Vivian checked her phone, scrolled through emails she was not really reading, and tried not to think about what was happening behind that closed door. Finally, Lorraine emerged, her expression carefully neutral. She walked over to Vivian and stopped, arms crossed. "They accepted," Lorraine said simply. Vivian felt her knees go weak with relief. "They did? $285,000. Full and final settlement. Marcus keeps the house but pays you the full amount within 45 days. You keep your car, your personal belongings, and your retirement account. No spousal support, But you didn't need it anyway with this settlement. Lorraine's professional mask cracked slightly, revealing a satisfied smile. You did it, Vivian. You stood up for yourself, and you won. They went back into the conference room together. Marcus was slumped in his chair, looking exhausted and defeated. Brennan had already prepared the settlement agreement, the pages laid out neatly on the table. Lorraine reviewed every line carefully, making sure the terms matched what they had agreed to, then nodded to Vivian. It's all here, Lorraine said. If you're ready, you can sign. Vivian picked up the pen and signed her name on the designated lines. Her signature was steady, confident. Marcus signed next, his movements jerky and reluctant. Then both attorneys signed as witnesses. And just like that, it was done. 9 years of marriage, dissolved in signatures and legal language. Brennan gathered the documents and placed them in his briefcase with efficient movements. The funds will be transferred according to the timeline we discussed, he said formally. Mr. Holloway will need to arrange for a home equity line of credit or a personal loan to cover the settlement amount. We'll be in touch regarding the final divorce decree once all financial obligations are met. Marcus stood abruptly, not looking at Vivian, and walked out of the conference room without a word. Brennan offered Lorraine a brief handshake, nodded politely to Vivian, and followed his client out. The door closed behind them, and suddenly, the room was very quiet. Vivian sat for a moment, staring at the empty chair where Marcus had been sitting. She waited to feel something. Sadness, maybe. Regret. Grief for what they had lost. But all she felt was a profound sense of lightness, as if an enormous weight had been lifted from her shoulders. How do you feel? Lorraine asked gently, sitting down beside her. Free, Vivian said, and realized it was true. I feel free. The next 45 days passed in a strange blur of activity and transition. Vivian threw herself into her work at the financial analysis firm, taking on extra projects and staying late at the office. Her colleagues noticed the change in her, the new confidence in her voice during client meetings, the way she spoke up more in team discussions. Her supervisor even pulled her aside one day to tell her that her recent work had been exceptional and to ask if she might be interested in a promotion to senior analyst. Vivian said yes, without hesitation. She also spent time setting up her new apartment, making it truly hers. She bought plants for the windowsill, bright green ferns and a small jade tree that she watered carefully every morning. She hung artwork on the walls, simple prints of landscapes and abstract colors that made her smile. She replaced the plain white bedding with soft blue sheets and a thick comforter that felt like sleeping in a cloud. Slowly, the space transformed from a temporary refuge into a real home. On a Tuesday morning in early November, Vivian's bank account showed a new deposit, $285,000. She stared at the number on her phone screen for a long moment, hardly believing it was real. Then she called Lorraine. He paid, Vivian said, her voice slightly breathless. The full amount. It's in my account. Good, Lorraine said with satisfaction. That means we can finalize the divorce decree. I'll file the paperwork today. Within 2 weeks, your marriage will be officially dissolved and you'll be free to move forward with your life. Thank you, Vivian said, and her voice was thick with emotion. Thank you for everything you've done for me. I don't think I could have gotten through this without you. You could have, Lorraine said warmly. You're stronger than you think, Vivian. You always were. I just helped you see it. 2 weeks later, the final divorce decree arrived in the mail. Vivian opened the envelope with hands that trembled slightly, pulled out the official document with its embossed seal and formal language, and read the words that confirmed what she already knew. Her marriage to Marcus Julian Holloway was legally and officially over. She stood in her small kitchen, holding the paper, and allowed herself to cry. Not from sadness, but from relief, from the overwhelming realization that she had survived something she once thought would destroy her. She had walked through fire and come out on the other side, scarred but whole, damaged but not broken. That evening, Vivian did something she had not done in years. She called an old friend, Rebecca, someone she had known since college but had lost touch with during her marriage. Marcus had never liked Rebecca, said she was too loud and opinionated, and gradually Vivian had stopped returning her calls and invitations until the friendship had faded away entirely. "Vivian," Rebecca's voice came through the phone, surprised and delighted. "Oh my God, I can't believe it's really you. How are you? It's been forever." "I know," Vivian said, smiling despite the tears still drying on her cheeks. "I'm sorry I disappeared. Things got complicated, but they're better now. Much better. And I was wondering if you'd like to meet for coffee sometime. I have so much to tell you." They met 3 days later at a small cafe near Vivian's apartment. Rebecca arrived in a whirlwind of energy, pulling Vivian into a fierce hug before they even sat down. They ordered lattes and settled into a corner table, and Vivian told her everything. The whole story, from the beginning of her marriage to its dramatic end. Rebecca listened with wide eyes, occasionally gasping or cursing, and when Vivian finished, she reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I am so proud of you," Rebecca said fiercely. "Seriously, Viv, you're a total badass. You stood up for yourself, and you didn't let him get away with treating you like garbage. That takes real courage." "I didn't feel courageous," Vivian admitted. "Mostly I just felt scared and angry." "Those are the moments when courage matters most," Rebecca said. "When you're terrified but you do the right thing anyway. That's what real strength looks like." They talked for 2 hours, catching up on years of missed conversations. Rebecca told her about her own life, her job as a marketing director, her recent breakup with a boyfriend who turned out to be emotionally unavailable, her plans to travel to Italy next spring. She also insisted that Vivian come to her birthday party the following weekend, where she could meet new people and reconnect with old friends from their college days. Vivian agreed, and when she showed up to Rebecca's party the next Saturday, she felt nervous, but also excited. The apartment was full of people, music playing, conversation and laughter filling the air. Rebecca introduced her around, and Vivian found herself talking to people who were interested in her work, her opinions, her life. Nobody asked her about her ex-husband. Nobody seemed to care what she did for a living, except to genuinely want to know more about financial analysis and what made it interesting. She felt seen, truly seen, for the first time in years. As the weeks turned into months, Vivian's new life began to take shape with increasing clarity. She used part of her settlement money to put a down payment on a small townhouse in a quiet neighborhood with tree-lined streets and friendly neighbors. It was not fancy, but it had a little backyard where she could plant a garden in the spring, and the mortgage payment was well within her budget. She moved in just before Christmas, carrying boxes up the front steps with Rebecca's help, and felt a surge of pride as she unlocked the door to her very own home. She also began investing the rest of her settlement money carefully, using the financial expertise she had developed over 12 years of analyzing market trends and economic projections. She diversified across stocks, bonds, and a high-yield savings account. She set up an emergency fund that would cover 6 months of expenses. She even started contributing more aggressively to her retirement account, something she had neglected during her marriage when all her money was going toward supporting Marcus's career. At work, the promotion to senior analyst came through in January. With it came a salary increase, bringing her annual income to $68,000. It was still nowhere near what Marcus made, but it was hers, earned through her own skills and hard work, and it felt more valuable than any amount he had ever made. One evening in late February, Vivian was sitting in her living room, a book open on her lap, when her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. She hesitated, then opened it. "Vivian, it's Marcus. I know I don't have the right to contact you, but I wanted you to know something. Jennifer and I broke up. It turned out she was only interested in me because I was a partner with money and status. Once the divorce became public and people at the firm started talking, she didn't want to be associated with the drama. She ended things 3 weeks after your party." I've spent the last few months thinking about everything that happened, and I realize now how badly I treated you. You deserved so much better. I'm not asking for forgiveness or trying to get back together. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. I hope you're doing well. You always were stronger than I gave you credit for." Vivian read the message twice, then 3 times. She waited for the anger to come, or the satisfaction, or even the temptation to respond with something cutting and cruel. But none of those feelings arrived. Instead, she felt a distant sort of pity for the man who had thrown away something real in pursuit of something that turned out to be hollow. She did not respond to the message. There was nothing left to say. Instead, she deleted it, set her phone aside, and returned to her book. Spring arrived with an explosion of color and warmth. Vivian planted tomatoes and herbs in her backyard garden, kneeling in the dirt with her hands covered in soil, feeling more grounded and present than she had in years. She joined a book club that met once a month at the local library. She started taking a yoga class on Thursday evenings, something she had always wanted to try, but never had time for during her marriage. She went on a weekend trip to the mountains with Rebecca, where they hiked through forests and laughed until their sides hurt, and slowly, quietly, she began to date again. Nothing serious at first, just coffee meetings and casual dinners with men she met through friends or dating apps. Some of them were nice, but not quite right. Some of them were clearly not over their own ex-partners. But Vivian was in no hurry. She had learned that being alone was far better than being with someone who made her feel small. Then, in early May, Rebecca introduced her to a man named Thomas at a mutual friend's barbecue. Thomas was a high school history teacher, 42 years old, with kind eyes and an easy laugh. He asked Vivian about her work with genuine interest, listened when she spoke about financial trends and market analysis, and did not try to diminish her expertise or talk over her. When he told stories about his students, his face lit up with passion and care. He was divorced himself, with 2 teenage daughters he clearly adored, and he spoke about his ex-wife with respect, despite their marriage not working out. They started seeing each other regularly. Coffee dates turned into dinner dates, turned into long walks through the park, where they talked about everything and nothing. Thomas never pressured her, never made her feel like she owed him anything, never treated her as anything less than an equal. And gradually, carefully, Vivian allowed herself to trust again, not blindly, not recklessly, but with the wisdom that came from having survived heartbreak and emerged stronger on the other side. One warm evening in June, exactly 9 months after she had walked out of her old life, Vivian and Thomas were sitting on her back porch, watching the sun set over her garden. The tomato plants were heavy with fruit, the herbs were fragrant in the summer air, and everything smelled of growth and possibility. "Can I ask you something?" Thomas said, turning to look at her. "You've told me bits and pieces about your marriage, but I've always wondered, do you regret it? Any of it?" Vivian thought about the question seriously. Did she regret marrying Marcus? Did she regret the years she spent supporting him, believing in him, loving him? Did she regret the pain and humiliation and betrayal? "No," she said finally. "I don't regret it. Not anymore. Because it taught me things I needed to learn. It taught me my own worth. It taught me that I'm strong enough to walk away from something that's hurting me, even when it's terrifying. It taught me that I deserve to be treated with respect and kindness, and that I should never settle for less." She looked at Thomas and smiled. "And it brought me here, to this moment, to this life that's mine. I wouldn't trade that for anything." Thomas reached over and took her hand, his grip warm and steady. "I'm glad it brought you here too," he said quietly. They sat together in comfortable silence as the sky turned from gold to pink to deep purple. And Vivian felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt whole. Not because someone else completed her, but because she had finally learned to complete herself. The house Marcus had fought so hard to keep eventually became too expensive for him to maintain on his own. Without Vivian managing the household finances, he made poor decisions, lived beyond his means, and accumulated debt. Vivian heard through mutual acquaintances that he sold the house at a loss 2 years after their divorce and moved into a smaller apartment. His career at Whitmore and Associates stalled after the scandal of his public divorce, and affair became firm gossip. He never made the jump to senior partner that he had always dreamed of. But Vivian did not take pleasure in his struggles. He had moved too far beyond that chapter of her life to care about what became of him. She was too busy building something new, something that belonged entirely to her. 5 years after walking out of that party, Vivian stood in front of her bathroom mirror, just as she had done that night so long ago. But this time, when she looked at her reflection, she saw someone completely different. She saw a woman with confidence in her eyes, strength in her shoulders, and peace in her smile. She saw a woman who had been tested and had not broken. She saw a woman who knew her worth and refused to accept anything less than she deserved. She was 44 years old now. She had been promoted again at work, now serving as the director of financial analysis, with a team of 5 analysts reporting to her. Her salary was $95,000 a year, nearly double what she had made during her marriage. She owned her townhouse outright, having paid off the mortgage early with smart investments and careful budgeting. Her garden flourished every spring and summer. Her friendships were deep and genuine. And Thomas, who was still in her life, still kind and steady and supportive, had recently asked her if she might consider moving in together. She had not given him an answer yet, not because she did not care about him, but because she wanted to make sure she was choosing him for the right reasons, not out of loneliness or fear or the need to be validated by someone else, but because he genuinely added joy and value to a life that was already full and meaningful on its own. Vivian smiled at her reflection and thought about the journey that had brought her here. The pain, the fear, the anger, the betrayal, but also the courage, the strength, the growth, the freedom. She thought about the woman she had been, standing in front of a mirror in a house that never felt like home, wondering when she had lost herself. And she thought about the woman she was now, standing in her own home, surrounded by a life she had built with her own hands and her own determination. She had been called Marcus's biggest mistake in front of 30 people, and at the time, those words had cut deeper than any knife. But now, looking back, she realized something profound. Marcus had been wrong about so many things, but he had been especially wrong about that. She was not his mistake. He was hers. And she had learned from that mistake, grown from it, and ultimately used it to become someone stronger and better than she ever could have been if she had stayed. The woman in the mirror smiled back at her, and Vivian felt a deep, unshakable certainty settle into her bones. She had not just survived her divorce. She had won, not because she got money or because Marcus's life fell apart, but because she had reclaimed herself. She had walked through fire and emerged transformed, scarred but not destroyed, bent but not broken. And that, she realized, was worth more than any settlement, any house, any marriage that was built on a foundation of inequality and disrespect. She had something now that no one could ever take away from her again: the absolute, unshakable knowledge of her own worth. She turned away from the mirror, walked downstairs to her kitchen, and poured herself a glass of wine. Then she sat in her living room, surrounded by the life she had built, and raised her glass in a quiet, private toast. "To new beginnings," she said softly to the empty room, "and to never being anyone's mistake again." Outside, the summer evening stretched golden and warm across her neighborhood. Children played in the street, their laughter drifting through her open windows. Birds sang in the trees, and Vivian sat in her home, in her peace, in her hard-won freedom, and felt completely, perfectly content. She had once been a woman who lost herself in someone else's shadow. Now she was a woman who created her own light, and that made all the difference. The story of her marriage and divorce would eventually fade into just one chapter of a much longer, much richer book. But it would always be the chapter that taught her the most important lesson of her life, that she was never anyone's mistake, and she would never again accept being treated like one. Vivian Grace Holloway had walked through her darkest valley and emerged into the light on the other side. And she had done it on her own terms, with her head held high and her dignity intact. That was the real victory. That was the real happy ending. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. And drop a comment below. What city are you watching from? And if your heart tells you to, feel free to leave me a tip on Buy Me a Coffee. Just check the first pinned comment. Thanks for keeping me company and for the coffee, and I'll see you in the next story.